In the last KTM video, we looked at the little RC125 and had a surprising amount of fun on it, given that it was a learner legal bike. In this video, we have quite a bit of an upgrade with the top of the line Super Duke R Evo. Now, the first thing to say, and what just about everyone else is saying, is that the engine is absolutely incredible. Generally speaking, I'm more of an inline-4 kind of guy, but there's no denying that in the real world, rather than the track for example, this thing will outpace just about anything on the road. It's 180 horsepower with the power much lower down in the rev range than it would be with an inline-4. There's just so much torque available to the rider, and with an upgraded exhaust system, you could probably get even more out of it. It's absolutely insane, but in an almost practical way. Despite the power, you'll have no problem stopping with big, fat dual Brembo brakes at the front. And you can actually play with the ABS a little, having it full on or putting it into supermoto mode, allowing you to lock the rears. Assuming you have balls that are much bigger than mine, that is. But it's not just the brakes, the suspension is clever too. It's fully electric, no surprise there, and you have the full array of presets, but there's also an automatic mode that'll detect what setting is appropriate based on how you're riding the road, and the bike will then adjust the suspension on the fly for you and your riding style. You can also electronically adjust things for when you're carrying a pillion too, like preventing it from diving too much under heavy braking. And on the twisties, it may not have the sports bike stance or the usual sports bike power delivery, but this thing is very confidence inspiring and you can really use that power instead of having to keep it screaming. Combining that grunty engine with the feeling of working that with a quick shifter, knocking it down whilst heading into a corner, will put a smile on your face every single time. But also, as a naked bike, we don't tend to think of them as motorway cruisers much. But with cruise control and adjustable heated grips, this thing will eat up the miles no problem. The wind is a bit of an issue admittedly, as with all naked bikes, but you could do hundreds of miles on this thing in a day easily. I know because I did. Not least because it's also quite comfortable. You're not scrunched in like with some of the sportier nakeds. Just make sure your helmet is strapped down, because with a good headwind combined with the Super Duke's acceleration, it's liable to fly off your head with the slightest twist of the throttle. A possible side effect of its comfortableness is that it's slightly taller. After all, this is great on the roads, but it's also designed to be a weapon on track, so you don't want the pegs hitting the deck. As such, when you first get on the thing, you'll find that it's tipped over quite a lot, and you really have to heave it up. It's not that much of an issue, as I don't think this is the right bike for more petite riders anyway, but something to bear in mind if you don't like dealing with a heavy bike. But having said that, I'm only 5'8" and I can get 1 foot flat on the ground relatively easily. And once you've set off, you won't have too much trouble, it's just that initial lifting it up from its resting position. In terms of styling, I have to say I'm not really a big fan of this bug aesthetic that KTM has gone for. It was the same with the RC125. From the front, they're actually pretty ugly, which is a shame because I absolutely love the orange trellis frames of KTM's, and the Super Duke R is especially pretty from the side, as it has a single-sided swing arm. It's just that you find yourself wanting to filter through traffic more, not so much to make good time, more so that you don't have to see the reflection of it in the back of a van. While having all these clever electronics is an amazing feature, one big disadvantage to having so many options on this thing is that you find yourself having to trawl through menus and sub-menus to find what you want. And while you're riding, that's just not practical. It'd probably benefit from having some quick select buttons like the BMW does. It does have something similar, but not quite the same. There's a two-way switch on the right-hand side that's customizable. It doesn't work quite as well, but you do get the flexibility of choosing how it's mapped, so that may be to some people's preference, but realistically they still take you through to a menu half the time, so you could still get yourself into some bother having to scroll through settings. The same fiddliness applies to the indicators, which are an electronic switch rather than having a more analog feel with some proper movement, so you often have to look down to check that they're actually turned on or off. However, one feature that I was actually quite grateful for was that the dashboard had a USB port in the side that can be used to power your phone. You may have noticed from most of our reviews that we use a quad lock so that we can use our phones as sat-navs. That's not a paid promotion, that's just what we use. So that was a nice thing to have. It's just a little annoying that despite having wide handlebars, we struggled a bit with placement, as you've got 2 brake reservoirs and quite a lot of wiring going to all those controls, being that everything is electronic. Back to the styling for a second. When we tested the RC125, I pointed out that I liked the idea of having a plastic fairing around the tank to protect the paintwork, especially on this bike as it has a matte finish. But I'm actually going to go back on that now, because now that I've had a bit more time with it, and with 2 bikes, the plastic actually gets scuffed very quickly, and you can't simply put a tank pad on this like you could on most bikes. So you're stuck with this large plastic piece that needs a fair amount of polishing to get the scuffs out all the time. And speaking of scuffs, one thing that is really annoying is that the bike is keyless go. Now, I've moaned about this before, and some of you have commented that you actually like it for some reason. But this is particularly annoying because it's also a keyless petrol tank. While it's easy enough to open, no amount of pushing is going to close it. You have to give it a fairly big whack to shut it. And considering most bike jackets have zips on the wrists, you're bound to have an accident at some point, either scuffing the cap or the pretty matte paint job. The pop-out key is only used for getting access under the seat. I think it's fair to compare this bike to the BMW S1000R, specifically I think the M model, as this is also the top-spec Super Duke. The reason being is that there are a lot of features that are the same. The advanced dashboard with the fully electronic suspension, the cruise control, the heated grips, quick shifter, although the bike we had wasn't fitted with the My KTM app connectivity, whereas I believe the BMW equivalent is a standard, at least on the M model anyway. And in that sense, I think I do prefer the BMW. All of the controls are a bit more thought out and less fiddly, plus while prices may vary, you're probably looking at spending another £2,000 at least for this version of the Super Duke, and that's a lot of money on top. The BMW, not taking into account people's preferences, does feel better quality for the money. What I'm not going to do is compare it to the Ducati Street Fighter, because quite frankly, it blows the Street Fighter out of the water. I do still love that bike, but this is just better. And I think you'll struggle to find a single journalist that disagrees with me on that one. Is it worth it, however? That's the question. Well, while the controls are fiddlier than the BMW, they're all there and you'd probably get used to them after a while. But the big thing is that that engine is just undeniable. It's possibly one of the best V-twins ever produced. If you can afford it, you'll have a bike that will take some beating for many years to come. Although, having said that, we've just ridden the anniversary Fireblade. But until then, we'll see you all next time.